tonight.
I said it's inconceivable that in the past few months, the administration has been withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel.
A planned White House meeting with Israel canceled, the latest as tensions flare in the Middle East. Plus,
China has a strategy. They call it disintegration warfare.
Beijing may not want a physical war with the United States, but it is waging a different kind. A look at China's threat to America and the 2024 race for the White House. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Concerns of an all-out war with Hezbollah on Israel's northern front. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. From the studio of the CBN News Bureau in Washington, I'm John Jessup. Well, Israel says a shipment of American military aid is on the way. The announcement comes one day after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claimed that the United States was withholding weapons needed to defeat Hamas. The White House strongly rejected those accusations, now the latest sign of growing tensions between Washington and Jerusalem. An Israeli spokesperson today said ammunitions and weapons are being delivered to the Jewish state.
U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, told him that the ammunition and weapons that the Prime Minister referred to are in the process of being delivered to Israel.
Meanwhile, escalating violence on Israel's northern border. The IDF has approved a plan to invade Lebanon if a war with Hezbollah breaks out. The terror group says it has the ability to target Israel from land, air, and sea in an open war. The two sides have traded fire nearly every day since October 7th. Both have signaled they're willing to expand the conflict. Well, Russia and North Korea have deepened ties between the two nations. Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un signed a strategic partnership in Pyongyang. Kim described the new agreement as the strongest ever treaty for Russia and North Korea and said it amounts to an alliance, which includes a pledge of mutual aid if either nation comes under attack. It also aims to work together to overcome U.S.-led sanctions. North Korea is already supplying Russia with weapons for its war in Ukraine. Well, back here in the United States, an investigation led to a major drug bust at the southern border. Officials say 24 Chinese nationals have been charged with conspiring with Mexico's Sinaloa drug cartel in a money laundering scheme to flood the United States with fentanyl. CBN Washington correspondent Tara Merger has been following the story. Tara, law enforcement call this case unprecedented.
That's right, John. Federal prosecutors in Southern California say this case is the first of its kind, with $50 million worth of drugs exchanged between these two groups.
Millions and millions of dollars are moved in proceeds from the drug sales in the United States back down to Mexico. And wealthy Chinese nationals in this country are given access to virtually limitless supplies of cash.
Prosecutors say the cartel has been using Chinese money launderers to conceal and convert this money into Chinese currency. The cartel is using this currency to import goods from China back to Mexico, and that includes precursor chemicals for manufacturing drugs like fentanyl and meth. Law enforcement also seized 300 pounds of cocaine alone. 10,000 fake fentanyl pills were also seized, according to the DEA. Now, this criminal network is said to include an array of Chinese, Mexican, and American men who allegedly work as couriers, money brokers, and traffickers in this elaborate scheme to pick up big amounts of cash from the sale of coke and meth in the LA area and launder that money for the dangerous and major drug cartel. The bust comes amid increased scrutiny of Chinese migrants. Ecuador has suspended visa-free travel for Chinese citizens, citing concerns over an increase in migratory flows from China. Ecuador has become a key transit point for thousands of Chinese migrants headed to the U.S. southern border.
Martinez Reyes couriers in Los Angeles picked up hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. Tens, 20s, 50s, and hundreds wrapped in rubber bands from drug traffickers supplied by the Sinaloa cartel. These couriers would take that money, count it, package it, and deposit it in bank accounts set up in their own names and in others' names, depositing small amounts over and over again to avoid the bank's reporting requirements.
And meanwhile, the CDC says fentanyl is the driving source of drug overdoses in the United States. Last year, John, more than 75,000 people died from opioids alone. Back to you.
Quite an elaborate scheme. CBN's Tara Mergener, thank you so much, Tara. Well, from flooding fentanyl across the southern border to undue political influence, one investigative journalist is accusing China's Communist Party of working to undermine America from within. CBN's Gary Lane has a story.
We've seen many examples of the danger China poses from cybersecurity hacks to the fentanyl crisis. In his book, Blood Money, Why the Powerful Turn a Blind Eye While China Kills Americans, author Peter Schweizer makes the argument that the communist leadership is at war with America, sowing chaos and death without firing a shot.
China has a strategy, they call it disintegration warfare, that says, look, we don't want to have a kinetic fighting war with the United States because that would lead to all kinds of disruption and damage in China. So we're going to try to beat them by not going to war, but by undermining them nonetheless.
Schweizer sees the Chinese Communist Party employing the tactics of ancient military strategist Sun Tzu. In The Art of War, he teaches an enemy can be defeated without having to fight.
They're doing this by sowing social chaos in the United States. They're literally killing Americans with fentanyl. The Mexican cartels are the junior partners. This is a Chinese operation. And they are engaging in other activities that are designed to tear America apart, and it seems to be working.
As fentanyl has continued to pour across the U.S. southern border, the CDC reports that in 2023 alone, the drug led to the deaths of more than 112,000 Americans. Schweizer writes that this ongoing crisis can only continue through political corruption. He claims to have found a link between gang leader Zhang Anli, also known as White Wolf, and the Biden family.
White Wolf has a business partner who gave the Bidens in 2017 a $5 million forgivable loan that the Bidens have never repaid. So you literally have 1 degree of separation between the first family of the United States and this poisonous fentanyl trade.
Schweizer believes this could be a reason why President Biden has not been more aggressive in confronting China on the fentanyl issue.
We need to remember that the bribery and corruption statutes in the United States say even if the actual politician doesn't get a dime, if his family member profits, that in and of itself is corruption.
Schweizer alleges China has financial ties with members of both major political parties in the United States, including outgoing Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Schweizer writes that McConnell's wife and former Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao owns a shipping company called Foremost Shipping, which has grown and expanded due to its Chinese business connections.
If Mitch McConnell as a senator were to do or say something that particularly angered Beijing, they could destroy the family shipping business overnight. That's the kind of leverage they have and the kind of leverage that they use.
As to the allegations, a spokesperson stated that Chao had not been involved with her family's business for over 40 years and deemed the allegations as spurious and deliberately malicious. According to Schweizer, his most surprising discovery is the involvement of 2 Chinese billionaires in inciting this division and chaos. He argues that Roy Singham, the founder of ThoughtWorks, and Joe Tsai, the co-founder of Alibaba, have invested millions in radical cultural causes, such as the transgender movement. Alibaba is a Chinese e-commerce company similar to Amazon.
But unlike Amazon in the United States, this is a business that's closely wedded to the Chinese government. What's troubling about these actions is not only their support of the cause, but the fact that they don't actually advocate for these causes in China itself, which leads me to believe that they see it more as a disruptive force in American society than something that they actually embrace as a belief system.
What can be done? Schweizer believes the country must first deal with Chinese political influence in Washington. After that, Americans need to be aware of what is going on. He says if people stay informed and are equipped, they can win this war for American hearts and minds. Gary Lane, CBN News.
In other news, the heat wave in the United States is strengthening its grip with scores of record high temperatures, including the first excessive heat warning issued by the National Weather Service in Caribou, Maine, where today's heat index was forecast to hit 105 degrees. From Maine to Mississippi, 70 million Americans are trapped under a heat dome. Chicago, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Boston, and Nashville are all forecast to break records in coming days. Doctors are warning patients that some blood pressure medicine and antidepressants can lead to dehydration. In Phoenix, the heat is so intense that medics are carrying what are called ice cocoons, bags to immerse victims in ice and quickly lower their body temperatures.
You see the calls firsthand. Once you get heat stroke, it is too late. It is literally one of the #1 killers across the country.
Meanwhile, the hot and dry conditions are fueling at least 19 wildfires. In New Mexico, one person died and thousands fled after a fire damaged or destroyed at least 500 buildings in the mountain village of Ruidoso. Crews in California are gaining more control over the post-fire near Los Angeles. Well, on this celebration of Juneteenth, a public arts project is gaining national attention. Cities across the country are displaying murals portraying the fight for equality. The artist tells CBN News he's using his freedom of expression to spread a message for future freedom fighters. CBN's Lori Johnson explains.
Ever since I was a child, I dreamed of creating. And so I live a high sense of freedom and that I get to do what I love.
You may have seen the art of Reginald C. Adams in your city. Driven by his deep gratitude for freedom, Adams is spreading the misunderstood and even misrepresented history of Juneteenth by bringing its history to life through murals.
2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, over 250,000 enslaved Black Texans were still being held captive. And so it took the Army and this declaration, which we recognize as the General Order, specifically General Order Number 3,
that order forced the Lone Star State to give Texas slaves absolute equality to rights and freedom, which is how the project got its name.
Absolute equality isn't a destination, it's a journey, it's a pursuit. And it's manifested in the collaboration of people coming from different backgrounds, different perspectives, different realities.
The project began in Galveston, Texas, the birthplace of Juneteenth. Now, 13 murals stretch across major U.S. cities, including Washington, honoring prominent African Americans like Frederick Douglass.
I thought to myself, if Frederick Douglass was alive, would he want just another portrait of himself? Probably not. He probably could care less to see himself. He'd probably be interested in a message, something around education or literacy, because he was an advocate for education.
These murals aim to inspire conversations about the history of equality, helping onlookers appreciate our diverse heritage and think critically about the world around them.
Socially, we have certain forces that are trying to ban books, ban history. It's hard to ban public art. When you put a message on Main Street, on a major intersection, no matter who you are, you get exposure and access to that message.
Adams plans to continue growing the project with the goal of creating murals in 7 more cities by 2025. In Washington, Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thank you, Lori. Coming up, the first presidential debate is just a week away. The latest on the race for the White House when Faith Nation returns. Welcome back. We're just over a week away until the first presidential debate kicks off in Atlanta between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. Both candidates are hoping to gain an edge as polls show they're running neck and neck. A new NPR PBS Marist poll shows Trump and Biden each receiving 49% of support from registered voters. That includes undecided Americans who are leaning toward one candidate. While pollsters say most voters know who they're voting for, some are willing to change their minds. The survey found younger voters and non-white voters were more likely than any other groups to say they would vote and change their vote. Well, joining us now is Ralph Reed, founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. Ralph, welcome back to Faith Nation. So tomorrow kicks off the start the Faith and Freedom Coalition's Road to Majority Conference right here in Washington, D.C. It's billed as the largest gathering of conservative Christian activists in the United States to rally around pro-family and pro-freedom policies. Ralph, can you talk about what you're putting at the fore to help your attendees understand what's at stake in the upcoming election?
Well, we've got somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 pastors and grassroots activists from all over the country. We have state organizations in 38 states. We're going to be knocking on 10 million doors in the key battleground states, reaching somewhere between 17 and 18 million voters of faith in their homes, at their doors. And we'll also be calling and texting them and emailing them and putting voter guides in 113,000 churches. So it's a very massive grassroots ground game. And the purpose of Road to Majority, our policy conference, is to not only get these folks energized and enthused and excited, which I think they already are. They're ready to walk across broken glass to get this vote out. And we've got an unbelievable lineup of speakers, including a number of the prospective vice presidential candidates. But more importantly, John, we're going to be having workshops and breakouts to talk about the nuts and bolts of building a grassroots infrastructure, how to organize your precinct, how to sponsor a voter registration drive in your church, how to persuade swing voters, and lots of other tried and true tactics of shoe leather politics that we know work and are going to make a huge difference in turning out the largest Christian vote in a modern political election in the United States.
Ralph, along those lines, surveys show that white evangelicals largely stuck with Trump in the 4 years from 2016 to the 2020 election. I know you're planning to spend some $62 million to register and turn out faith voters, but how many more voters do you expect you can turn out?
You know, we think it's not knowable because we won't really know until we get there, when we get a lot closer to it. But, you know, Trump got about 24 million evangelical votes in 16 and got 36 million in 20. That's an increase of 50% in one election cycle. It's the largest recorded in the history of exit polling. We're not quite sure we can get to that level because the electorate increased from 16 to 20 from about 130 million to almost 160 million. But we think we can add somewhere between 6 and 8 million more evangelical votes.
Ralph, and real quickly before we go, I do want to sneak in one extra question. You know, as many as 12 states will put the question of abortion to voters in ballot measures. Pro-abortion forces have seen success in statewide referenda to protect abortion. Can you tell us why that is? And if this is the front that the fight is going to be fought, what do you envision as a response in the potential Trump second term?
Look, we want a huge victory with the Dobbs decision, and we've passed pro-life laws, either heartbeat bills or late-term abortion bans, or even more pro-life than that in 21 states. They're going to run out of states where they can put initiatives on the ballot. They have to get to 60% in Florida. I think it's going to be very hard for them to get there. So at some point, they'll run out of these states where they can qualify initiatives. And then after that, it's our turn. And we're going to keep moving the pro-life ball down the field.
All right. I wish we had more time with you, Ralph. Much success to you guys on your conference. Ralph Reed, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, a new strategy to combat the dangers of social media. Well, from violent and sexual content to bullying and harassment, the U.S. Surgeon General says social media is dangerous to children, and he's calling for urgent action. His move comes as growing research indicates social media is harmful to young people's mental health. CBN's Brady Carter reports.
Everyone knows someone who's been harmed by social media. Everyone knows a girl who is cutting herself out of anxiety. So this is very different from any previous moral panic.
Social psychologist and best-selling author Jonathan Haidt links the rise in mental health issues to the widespread use of smartphones and handheld devices. And the science would seem to back that up. Several studies show adolescents spending more than 3 hours a day on social media report high levels of anxiety and depression. Increase that to 5 or more hours, and a suicidal risk factor comes into play. Teenagers already spend an average of 4 to 6 hours online each day. These numbers are driving U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy to call for drastic action.
Now, a warning label would help parents to understand these risks.
His idea of tobacco-style warning labels would require congressional action.
Keep in mind, when Congress authorized these labels for tobacco more than half a century ago, or nearly half a century ago, the smoking rate in America was above 40%. Today, it's under 12%. That's an extraordinary amount of progress. Labels were a part of that effort.
Dr. Murthy also wants Congress to protect children from harmful online content and companies collecting sensitive data. A groundbreaking Florida law could pave the way for other states seeking to do that.
We know from law enforcement, we know from our prosecutors that social media is the primary platform in which children are trafficked.
Florida House Speaker Paul Renner played a crucial role in updating a law that would prevent kids under 14 from using social media and prohibit minors from accessing pornography.
Because truly, these platforms are using addiction, not just for kids, but for adults, to keep us online, keep those eyeballs online as long as possible. So we do see other states looking at what we've done. We see the national conversation.
On a larger perspective, Dr. Haidt argues social media has altered social interaction to such a degree among children that historic social norms have been disrupted.
We used to have a play-based childhood for the last, 50 million years. That's what mammals do. They play. Young mammals must play a lot. If you've ever had a puppy, you know that. But we took our children in the 90s and said, no more of that, no more outside play. You have to be supervised all the time. So the loss of the play-based childhood set them up for a kind of a weakness and fragility.
Social media stocks took a dip yesterday after the Surgeon General's call to action. Now Americans are waiting to see how tech giants like Meta, X, and TikTok respond. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Well, finally tonight, most people are familiar with the legend of George Washington chopping down his father's cherry tree as a child. Well, it turns out he did collect bottles of cherries at his Mount Vernon home. In an incredible discovery, 250 years later, archaeologists unearthed 35 glass bottles from the 18th century storage pits in the estate's cellar. Most of the bottles are intact, containing perfectly preserved cherries and other berries. The contents will undergo DNA testing, and the bottles will be sent off for conservation, though I doubt they're good for eating. Well, that does it for tonight's Faith Nation. Thanks so much for watching. We hope to see you back tomorrow.